Hello, and welcome to the Specialty Matcha podcast. My name is Ryan. This is my co-host Zongjun,
Well, hello.
who also goes by Sam, and we're the co-founders of Senko Matcha Product.
Yeah, we launched this podcast to discuss our learning journey in matcha, share startup stories, and interview experts. And today we have Marcel from Unearthed Gallery joining our podcast. Hello, Marcel.
Hello.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah,
It's
thank you for
a long
joining us.
time coming. I think we first met like 2 months ago now, 3 months.
Yeah, it was also a coincidence that I found your podcast, and despite the fact that I didn't know you personally, like clicked very quickly in a sense of like the approach and the topics you're dealing with. So I was really intrigued by the idea of getting in contact with you guys.
Awesome, and thanks for reaching out. It's really cool to see that like we had a lot of similar interests, both on the tea side, but also on the ceramic side, which was cool. Could you give a little background for everyone, like sort of your tea journey, how you got into tea, teaware, and sort of everything that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, my tea journey started like 15 years ago now, I think, when I was just finding a random Chinese tea tin in actually my mom's cupboard, and it was like a Taiping Hokui.
Oh,
And I didn't know that it was anything special. I was just drinking it during my bachelor thesis, like writing my bachelor thesis, and then after finishing the tin, I was so hooked on this flavor and like how amazing this tea was that I went into a very deep rabbit hole.
interesting.
Yeah, I think it was like a gift from a friend of ours who was in the solar industry and like the PV industry and went to China regularly, and he got it as a gift. You know, China, you always get tea as a gift, so it's ended up with me, which was a good.
Yeah, Hokui is one of those pressed, very long, flat green tea that has a very sweet and umami taste.
It's a very unique like flavor profile, and
Yeah.
also visually it's like very interesting. And that time it was almost impossible to find anything in Germany or Europe online, even any of that kind of teas. And I was first like surprised by the prices, and then also by what the offerings of these very specialized stores were. This was maybe one online shop in Germany who offered it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and that kept me starting. And at the same time, a very good friend of mine who was more into like the like West Coast hippie culture and so on. He read some books, and they were drinking matcha and tea there, and like like kind of Alan Watts circle and stuff. And there was also like already kind of a bit of a tea culture, Western tea culture in the US, which then we kind of like came together, and instead of beer, we were drinking tea every weekend.
That's
Yeah.
cool. So you're based in Munich. How have you seen that the tea scene, matcha scene evolve since you're the kind of first inspiration?
I think it really, with my personal journey, it developed like very in a parallel way, in a sense of that like 15 years ago it was a very niche thing, like it's still very niche, but it it was more and more easy to buy certain teas. It started with Japanese green teas like senchas, and there were like new importers starting and supplying these kind of mom and pop tea shops, and there were more and more specialized online vendors coming up. And it really evolved a lot in the last like 10, 15 years, I would say. Nowadays there's even vendors in Germany who are specialized only in yancha from Huishan, or others
Wow.
are specialized only in Taiwanese teas and so on. So yeah, so there's a wide spectrum of specialized vendors. And since a few years, there's also these tea festivals. So I think since 5 years,
Wow.
since maybe 2018, 19, like the whole tea scene really kicked off with these tea festivals. Yeah. So I think that's similar to the US, I guess. Yeah, there's more and more festivals also in Canada.
Yeah. Although I think the European ones are a little bit earlier. Like the Prague Tea Festival is a really big one, right?
Yeah, Prague they have two now. They used to always have one which had a bit of a more like a like alternative vibe, and now they have a new one which is very, I would say, like specialty vendor focused and international. And then there was the Berlin Tea Festival, which is like more the kind of the biggest, very specific tea festival, which is running since 2018, I think. And yeah, that the first edition, I missed it because I was on my tea sabbatical that time, where I went to visit a lot of tea growing areas and also pottery places. And 2019, then I joined the festival. It was really nice, just as a visitor.
You went to Japan on your tea sabbatical?
No, Japan was already earlier. I went for 3-4 weeks, and then in the tea sabbatical I was like having a trip from India, southern India, to Shanghai by road. And that was like not really all road, but I went to Taiwan in between and was 2 times 4 weeks in China. It was like
Where,
kind of like a bit the Bodhidharma trail.
where'd you start in southern India? Were you in like Chennai or more on like Goa side?
I started in Kerala. Actually, I flew
Kerala.
into Mumbai, and then I visited some friends because I did some exchange semester in southern India in 2011 or 10. And then I visited some friends and I went to a pottery studio in southern India during the winter because I was like, I'm going to spend the winter in southern India and worked on my own pottery. And then from January onwards, I was traveling north until May. So it was like 5 months traveling from southern India to Shanghai. I went through, yeah, like obviously Darjeeling, Assam, Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, China.
Okay. And it went in like through Kunming and then went, what is it, east?
Exactly.
Okay.
Then from Kunming to Guangdong, and um, and there I missed it, missed the train, so I had to take a flight because I was at the wrong train station in Kunming. I didn't realize
No,
because it was my first train ever in China.
it's its own system.
Yeah, because they have these endings, and then if you book through an English app, I got a bit confused. Yeah, and then I went to Hong Kong, and from there to Taiwan for another month. So
Oh,
it was like
cool.
kind of like I had a dual entry visa for China, and then I maximized each entry. you know,
Okay. Nice. Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. Because then you came out then back in. Yeah.
yeah, so basically I went a few days to Jiaozhou and to Wudongshan, and then I went to Hong Kong, and that you leave China basically in Hong Kong. I spent a few days in Hong Kong, and then I took a flight to Taipei from there and came back to Fujian. So it's kind of like a maximized trip. I want to see as much as possible because that time I was working in consulting and I was not sure if I want to continue. So I took a sabbatical and did this whole like pottery and tea trip. And that was also really like the kick off or the foundation of my current business also because that time I had my first connections with potters and a lot of people, also Westerners living in China and making tea or selling tea online and stuff like that. So this like my circle of contacts grew a lot in this time.
Super cool.
Very
Like
interesting.
I went
starting
from
all the way in Kerala and ending up in Fujian. It's that's crazy. That's
yeah.
cool.
I mean, I wanted to also see this whole like kind of like the origin area of tea, like the eastern Himalayas, like the Yunnan border area, but also and see what happens in Laos and like maybe Thailand and Myanmar. Myanmar was a bit difficult, obviously, but even there I did a short hike and I like guided hike and I saw some old tea trees.
Cool.
Yeah, by the
Did you do that in northern Laos too? I heard there's a bunch of tea production up there.
Yeah, northern Laos I went to, but it's super, super difficult to get there. Like I think our bus broke down twice in this like 8-hour journey from, I think what's this tea called? I forgot the name now. But basically it's really remote Phongsali province, I think, the prefecture, Phongsali province. And they have a few villages which have really old trees, but the processing is a bit weird. They make it like almost like a green tea, like a green pour. So it
yeah,
doesn't age very well.
Well, I heard quality's getting better. I have a friend of my girlfriend lived in Laos for like 8 years, doing a lot of NGO work, and one of his projects was in northern Laos, setting up a tea cooperative to raise tea quality and kind of borrow a lot of pu'er processing methodologies. And they're trying to promote it and do some ecotourism and kind of boost the quality of the region.
I was just in Yiwu in Yunnan, which is very close to the Laos border. There are a lot of smugglers of bringing Laotian tea leaves into Yiwu and gets processed as Yunnan pu'er nowadays. It's very interesting. It's kind of like how people import the Kagoshima tea into Uji
Uh,
and makes Uji
It's
tea.
just on a motorbike in Laos border. I think that this is like the problem, like it is not really enabling the farmers there to produce their own tea, but rather like, the EVU merchants and tea makers can sell that tea basically almost the same price as their own tea. But yeah, I think Laos is a very poor country. They could really profit from a bit more like individual tea scene there and selling it abroad to Europe and US maybe. Because to China, it probably doesn't work on that way. You would have to go
yeah,
through EVU.
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I don't think the Chinese would be that interested in the Laotian pu'er production as much as the West would be. Because then it's like New World pu'er, like it's new. I don't know well, actually, you get into the same problem with matcha. Can you
Yeah.
even call it pu'er if it doesn't come from Yunnan? Even though it's like basically the same forest, processed in the same way. It's
They're the
it seems
same
a bit
people,
iffy.
actually. A lot of those
Oh,
Yao
like
people
ethnically,
and Bulang people, because like the border is quite recent compared to the history of those people living there. So they used to be just one big region of the same people doing the same thing.
Exactly. I think they have much more in common with each other than they have common with the Han Chinese kind of
Oh yeah,
all those mountain tribes or like minorities. They have different cultures, but they have a certain way how they live. And it doesn't matter if you're in, I don't know, maybe Upper Assam even, or in northern Myanmar or northeastern Myanmar or in China. It is very similar. They all have a certain way of living.
it's interesting. I guess pivoting back into matcha, you
Mhm.
recently did a bunch of like specialty matcha workshops with people in Germany. Would love to learn a little bit more about how you structured that and then sort of what the response was from people there. Were they, and I'm also kind of curious if they were like tea people that are like general tea people that wanted to learn more about matcha, or they like came in really fresh with not as much context.
I mean, first of all, the motivation was kind of to offer it to everyone, to really like offer a workshop to everyone who's interested in matcha as a kind of as a product and beyond only the matcha latte craze and wants to discover. And it's really open for everyone. But because I have a existing customer base, which also visited my past workshops. I have one workshop is called Journey of Tea, which I'm offering every month, and it's kind of a introduction into, let's say, specialty tea from a historical perspective. And I introduced let's say 5 to 6 different types of tea in the tasting also, and a lot of people came from that tasting. And also some new customers who came specifically for the matcha, and they want to learn about matcha. They kind of like probably drink a lot of matcha latte, and they want to learn how to drink it at home or how to drink maybe pure matcha and what to care about if you make decisions as a consumer. I think that's the kind of two groups which came together there. And yeah, the motivation behind the workshop is really to also offer like education to a wide range of people, because everybody's talking about the powdered green tea, but a lot of people don't even know what they're drinking. It's a bit like cocoa pulver which you buy in the supermarket, but actually matcha is a very specialized product. So I think it comes from the tea ceremony, so it's not comparable. And I think there is nothing like that yet here in Munich or Germany, kind of like a workshop which really offers the like kind of holistic approach to what matcha can be, kind of. And I think that the two pillars of any kind of like sustainable growth for me, doesn't matter if it's specialty tea or specialty matcha, is always like kind of the education part and the transparency part. I think like I even remember I gave a talk in this 2019 Berlin Tea Festival, like for B2B audience, where I talked about numbers of the tea market. And I was like telling them, we don't know where we are currently in the market. Maybe there was a big hype and now everybody opens up online shops, but they will all close down in 2 years, which was the fact, as some of them did close down. And how can we sustainably grow as this industry together? I think it's always important. First of all, you have to educate your customers, and then you have to be transparent about your products as much as possible. Yeah, this workshop obviously is about the education part and enabling the customers then to distinguish a transparent and non-transparent matcha brand or something like that. In that sense, that's the idea also behind it.
So what was the event like? Like if we participated, like what would we expect? Like how did you structure the experience?
So it is, at the end, it is kind of a guided tasting with a short practical part at the end. It is around 2 to 2.5 hours, and I basically separated in 4 sections, which each have one tasting in it. And I start at the real basics. So what is matcha? We talk about the kind of like rough definition of matcha, where it comes from, the mocha from Song Dynasty, and talk a bit about what distinguishes matcha from like other basic Japanese green teas, so that people have an understanding just very roughly for the beginning. And then we already start to try our first tea, which is a tea which I currently am selling. It's like a blend by Maruki Koyama specifically for the European Union. And it's just like kind of for me, like this kind of benchmark idea of what matcha used to be, and like a good quality matcha used to be until now, and was consumed also widely, like in a tea ceremony sphere, but also just for matcha lovers, I would say. It was very accessible. And I think it's good for them to try like a blend in the beginning to see, okay, what is a solid, well blended matcha? But from there, we take a kind of a turn and look at this lineup of Maruki Koyama, which is like, there's an interesting chart, which I also show in the workshop. It's like a line of the different qualities. So they have a basic lineup, which is not the specific Urasenka lineup or something, just the basic lineup. And it's basically this kind of matrix of like softness and bitterness and boldness and lightness, and I think. And then there are these different matcha cans lined up in one single line, basically. And
So
you
it's
can
like
see how
a two by two, classic two by two.
exactly it's a one-dimensional line in this two-dimensional space. It shows you how like one-dimensional the approach is, kind of. Obviously, the ingredients are multi-dimensional because they have so many different like lots they blend into those teas. But at the end, what they want to get is this like very simple, like, okay, this tea costs double as much as this, and so on. So if you see the prices, at some point it's like steps of like maybe 800 yen. At some point, it just doubles. The price doubles and doubles and doubles. So it's. I think it's not bad. It's just their approach. I think it's, for a first guess, it's very easy, but we want to go beyond that and understand a bit more what this product actually is. And that's where I come in with this specialty term, because the workshop is called Specialty Matcha Workshop, a bit like in the sense of your podcast. Like, how do you term or use a term to show that you want to go beyond the kind of very classical blends and want to show a bit more the specificness, the specific characteristics of different types of matchas. And that's what we do then in the second step. Define what is what should be on a label of a matcha, like from my perspective, in the sense of like we start with the growing regions, with the cultivars, with the shading technique and how long it's shaded, and then maybe even fertilization methods, and then in the sense of, is it stone ground or not, and all these differences where you really say, okay, these are different dimensions, and each matcha can be kind of classified a bit in these dimensions. And it gives us a first good guess to estimate how this product could taste. That's kind of like the core part of the workshop, to learn a bit about those. It's kind of like a table you would wish to have on every website which sells specialty matcha, like these kind of categories which you want to have filled out every time you see a product on a website.
That'd be a dream. I have a quick question. What is the difference in taste between the EU compliant Marukyu blends and the non-EU, like the ones that you would buy in Japan? What's your experience? Is it like pretty close? Because I imagine it has to be much more compliant from a pesticide residue requirement. But like, how does that translate in the cup?
I think they're very comparable. I think they might have a bit less umami and like maybe hint more bitterness. Like, it's not like, I think from the quality, the subjective quality, I feel like they're very similar, but maybe some of the specific traits are a bit different. Like, it's where I say, I think the strong umami, it's very hard to do with kind of like more organic fertilizer and stuff. And then also like very, very, very low bitterness is also very difficult without the use of pesticides. And these are not pesticide-free teas, but they are blended in a way that they have very, very low pesticides because, yeah, they're just specific pesticides. I guess they're not even registered in the European Union for use, and that's why the minimal residue level is very, very low, the allowed one in the European Union. So basically, if they use something in Japan and it's allowed, it might be like blacklisted in Europe because nobody uses it. It's a specific tea. I think in Taiwan it's the same.
Oh, interesting. So it's not even on their radar because it doesn't even matter from an agricultural perspective in the EU.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think they don't even apply it to any crop here. So and probably they don't really look into the research about the pesticide. That's my understanding. But I'm also starting to learn in this topic only because it's the question how much difference is between EU standard and let's say JAS organic. How much is this gap? How many teas fall into this gap?
Yeah, that would be an interesting research.
Probably pretty big. Like from what I understand, the EU could do a lot more to better understand and then regulate tea, especially coming from other countries. That's I think Ian from Unomi was telling us that if there was a bit more research done, like better tea could enter the EU, and that they just take a little too hard of a line was our, at least my understanding.
Yeah, I think that the level is basically so low that it's like just if it's just registered basically in the test, then it's almost not compliant.
You were telling us something very interesting about the JAS certification and how you can look at like some different matcha brands or matcha labels. And if the serial number is still on, you can actually trace it back all the way. It was really interesting to learn on our last call. I had never heard that before, but it was
No,
really like a
basically,
good
yeah.
tip.
Yeah, I mean, it depends if it's registered on the farmer or on the company. I guess it depends on who labels the tea, but the person who labels and has the certificate has to put the number on. And I think the last person in the chain basically puts the JAS number on. And depending on who packaged it and so on, it could be the farmer or the producer, or it could be the wholesaler or someone. It's like matcha intelligence.
Some verified provenance that
Yeah.
goes back.
But at the end, when I try to pin down certain matchas which I tasted somewhere, it is often not so difficult to find out who the producer could be because the amount of producers, especially the amount of people who then grind the matcha, is very limited because as you realized, I think a lot of farmers, they don't grind themselves and they don't have any capacity to grind their own matcha. So like I think, for example, in Yame, it's really like the farmers are not really enabled to produce their own matcha. It's all going to the big players. And I mean, the big players doing a good job, but still, it could be very interesting. For example, when you introduce your mill in the future, and I can go to Japan and find a really small farmer who has some really interesting tencha. I mean, if he has an ability to make tencha, then I can buy it from him and grind it here in Munich.
That's our dream too. It's to shorten that, to close the infrastructure gap, to because there's a lot of consolidation. I mean, there's a lot of power in the way that like the the tea actually moves throughout the supply chain, and it's so concentrated at certain points. Be interesting to see if we can shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, I guess that's also about how risk averse those farmers are. If they are they're a bit more bold, they would just kind of like pay someone to grind it. And I think that's possible. I guess they have the network, but then they have the risk of like selling it themselves. So the question is like, if you don't sell it yourself, why would you grind it yourself? It is kind of chicken and egg problem, also financially, I guess, for them.
And that's when the clock starts from a quality perspective.
Yeah. It's kind of similar situation in Pu'er too. They outsource the pressing process to kind of a consolidated factory. Similar situation because it's very expensive to acquire the machineries and the labor, and the government doesn't necessarily issue the production certificate anymore to individual pressers. So kind of similar situation in Japan too. It's getting very expensive to acquire lands and build new factories and buy machineries from Shizuoka.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering about the whole Tensha factories, like, because there's a lot of sorting going on. I mean, in China as well, when you have these like Huangpian sorting things
Yeah.
going on, like which was done by hand before, but nowadays it doesn't make sense anymore, I guess, for certain qualities. Even like better, poorer will be sorted with machine because it's just cheaper. And then also you have to go probably to someone and get it sorted. But then I think in Japan, also those Tensha factories, I don't know if they're like some of them communal or only the big players have the Tensha factories and like all this, like, the sorting of the kind of, like the stems and the veins, like after the step where they cut the leaves in pieces and then sort out the veins. I think they have this, like, there are these very advanced machines which can, this array of cameras, and they can like use pressure
Yeah.
air to
Air
shoot out
jets.
those.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this thing, I mean, doesn't make sense to buy it as a farmer if you use it like twice a year. And it's also all those things are bottlenecks. And I'm coming back to the workshop. I'm now working also because I have to use the matchas which I'm offering right now also in the workshop. I'm now working with one farmer in Nishio, and luckily he has his own milling facilities, but they're also probably limited. So the question is like, okay, how much can I get if I want to get more? And he does these single cultivar productions. So he has 4 cultivars he picks by hand, or people pick by hand, and they're shaded quite long. And there's a like single cultivar Saimidori, um, Tsuhikari, and Okuhikari, I think. And then also, interestingly, Benifuki single cultivar matcha, which is like very unique thing. So he produces this like anti-pollen or anti-allergy tea as a matcha. And it's interesting because, like you have one farmer in one region who does basically like probably the fields are just next to each other, and he does like the same process. The harvesting date obviously varies due to the cultivar, and it wouldn't be possible to pick all this by hand, but that's like really interesting to taste this side by side and see the differences which only the cultivar gives. And that's like kind of the tasting for the second part, and see like, here are your criterias, and this is an example to see and taste it in a cup. Everything is the same, but one variable changed, and it's very different matcha. I think it's
That's
very
cool.
like cultivar driven.
That set of tasting experiences is either really hard or really expensive to put together. That's a cool from a workshop perspective, because if you have a large enough group, it's okay. But even just acquiring these kind of back-to-back samples is quite difficult. So that's super cool.
Yeah, so basically I'm also offering now 2 of his hand-picked matchas. And they're also reasonably priced because it's not such a famous growing area. And I think they're pretty good. The value, I'm just like, no advertising, but I'm just like, personally, I want to only sell stuff which I would also consume myself for that price point. So that's my approach with everything. And that's, just nice. I got this specifically also for the workshop because it's really nice to have this option to try those teas really next to each other. It's difficult because, as you know, like the experience of drinking matcha, or even the experience of drinking other tea, especially like teas which have like kind of a long finish or some kind of change happening, like a huigan or something like that, especially, it's very hard to say, oh, this comes from this and that comes from that tea, because maybe the sweetness which stays in your mouth 1 minute after drinking, which one was it now, but
Problem with the sequential tasting.
but what's interesting is you can really taste that the Saimidori is like basically has no bitterness at all, and is more light flavor, and also a bit more in the vegetal side, but has a nice creaminess. And Tsui Hikari is like so much bolder, a bit more astringent, but it also has more umami and a more complex flavor, I would say, overall. And they both have kind of a nice finish. So in that sense, it's nice for them to try those both, and also like, it's the first experience of trying 2 different cultivars next to each other for most of them.
Interesting. So, in terms of people's preference, what are your observations? Like, do people generally prefer umaminess in the tea, or how? Like, do they like the bitterness or do they not like the bitterness at all?
I mean, this is something I'm working on in this workshop, because the first 2 sessions I made them also with feedback form. Like everybody had to give feedback. That's why it was like for a better price than it will be in the future.
Nice.
I collected some data, and interestingly, people then I feel like that from all the matchas, people then think that the blend still is very balanced, and they really like the blend, the Marukyu-Koyama blend. But I think the preferences are very different. And I think because some people gave me feedback, oh, they want to try even more matcha, and they couldn't get enough. And then some other people were like, oh, this was like very strongly prepared in the sense of the ratios I'm using and so on. Maybe for beginners, it would be better to make it lighter. So it's really like at the end where you at with your personal preference and also your journey.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Do these people have experience with other beverages? Like, are they like coffee drinkers or wine drinkers at all?
I think most of them they drink tea regularly. I think that
Drinkers.
most of them had some experience in tea, and some of them in coffee. But I didn't specifically ask about wine. That's good question actually, which I should put in the questionnaire now.
Yeah.
To see what other like specialty products they're like consuming. It's a bit like sake, for example. The first time someone tries sake and they're used to wine, they cannot really deal with those flavors. They're often a bit too bold. And even sake as a Japanese product has like umami, and like sometimes it's just like kind of like cheesiness, which normally wine or like whatever French white wine doesn't really have to that extent. It's just very extreme.
Yeah, it's a totally different flavor universe. I have a hard time actually, because you kind of sip them both in the same way. You know, the alcohol level's about the same, and like getting out of the wine mindset is actually I find quite difficult.
Some of the aged sake are, I would say I draw more comparison between them and like sherry or Madeira.
Yeah, actually, I have a sake fridge here. It's now becoming my matcha fridge.
Oh, cool.
But
Oh,
it's
nice.
cool because it's a ventilated, like very dry fridge, so it's very practical for matcha as well. And obviously, it's only used for sake because I have a collaboration with a friend of mine. He used to live in Japan, and he has actually a website which is specialized on aged sake. And yeah,
Oh,
and he
nice.
has really interesting. Also, there's also I think some sake which is then aged in a sherry barrel for another year or two. Obviously, then it's not pure anymore, but also interesting. And there's
Interesting.
this like very distinctive curry note to a lot of those aged sake, like
Hmm.
kind of really strong curry note, which is interesting for many people when they try it the first time.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Some autorussal oxidation. Like, it's very nice.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, but I think for the matcha, it's really like for some people, like when I describe to people, for example, when they drink gyokuru, like in this, if you do it like a bit of the gongfucha style way, you brew it in the very beginning with a very, very crazy ratio. So basically, you just cover the leaves, and then you get these few drops out, and then they enter your tongue, your mouth, and you get this like feeling of, oh, now it's gonna get really bitter, and you're already like prepared for this bitterness and astringency. But then somehow there's just a bit of this astringency, and everything becomes like kind of a mellow sweetness and this like umami flavor. I think it's like that's like for me the what's so nice about the gyokuru, in the sense that for matcha, obviously it's always a bit stronger and bolder, and you have to like embrace, or you have to like, if you expect now this like super strong bitterness, like it's just too strong for you, even if the bitterness never really comes, because you're not used to this like
Intensity.
experience in your mouth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so intense.
Yeah, but this is like the ending of the second part. Like, like we talk really about the details of the processing differences you can have. Obviously, I have to like speed up the part a bit because there's these like 5-6 dimensions, and you can't really spend more than like a few minutes on each. But I think it's good for the beginning because just like a cheat sheet you can take and see, okay, how do they actually disclose what this matcha is, it actually stone milled or not? Then Yeah. I mean, nowadays I go on websites and I see weird things. It's written like Tana shaded, and then there's a picture of like the um, how's it called? I always forgot the name. Not Tana shaded. That's something with K, I think. I forgot the name now. So the normal
Kind
shading which they do. Yeah, exactly. Um, and you see that they put a picture in their product, like it's a product picture. You see the bushes being shaded, but they write Tana shading, and it's like these things happen now very often. It's a bit sad because yeah, and it's also the reason I initially started to think about this matcha more and more, because I think about a year ago I was already seeing the current matcha trend kicking off, and I'm drinking matcha since 10 years or 12 years, but not as much as I do now. And I was like, sometimes with a few friends, I was ordering one parcel from Maruku Kuraman from Uji directly when they didn't have a web shop. You just write them email, and then you order like 20 tins, and then you pay the import tax and so on. It's not a problem if you share it, and then you have your yearly stock of matcha. Like I'm drinking maybe 4 or 5 cans of matcha a year. That's enough for me. Like I drink it mostly in the summer. Fun fact: I used to have also an online shop around 10 years ago with 3 other friends, and was just a side, very small online shop. And we asked Maruku Kuyaman if we can sell their tea or their matcha that time, but they declined back then.
of
Oh, wow, okay.
Because we were just a very small random online shop. But now, because I'm doing a lot of exhibitions with Unearthed, which have to do with Chanoyu and like chawans, often have chawans on display, or even chaire. I think they were more interested in working with me now. So I'm like, could become official reseller.
nice.
I was in Sofia, Bulgaria. I think
Hmm.
it was last summer, and I was looking at the matcha scene on Google Maps, and there was a place that specialized in matcha, and they only sold Marikyu product. They were a wholesaler. It was a very interesting experience in a place that I would have never guessed. This guy was telling us all about the poetic names. He was like pure, like he's Bulgarian. Fell into this matcha thing and was wholesaling. And I thought, wow, Marikyu has quite the reach.
That's interesting.
Maybe they've opened up a little bit since 10 years ago, too, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, they also, like all the Eurosenke students all over the world,
Yeah.
I think many of them order for their school, like kind of a parcel every 2 months or something. That's like what I guess. I mean, I think in Munich, it's like that. They have this tea house here in our English garden, our like central park, basically, and they meet up there regularly to practice, and they always use Koyama and matcha.
Well, despite
Question. Go
Despite
ahead.
our issue with the poetic names of these traditional houses, one of my favorite matchas is from Maruku Koyama-en. It's Tenju. It's a very, very nice. Has this really interesting, intense, like fresh olive oil, like spiciness to it. And that flavor just disappeared the second day we opened that can.
Yeah.
But it was
Honestly, I
sublime.
also realized that like a similar flavor, like especially when smelling a can which I just opened, because basically my first batch arrived like 5 6 weeks ago, and I think they literally milled it a week before, and they have, I
Oh,
think, good shipping rates with DHL, and the thing like arrived within 4 days in Munich. So
Nice.
like this matcha was literally like 7 days packed and milled. And I think for the European Union they have specific milling lines which only do that because of contamination and stuff. And then basically you have to order it, and then it comes to you so fresh. And I opened 2 of the cans and to test it and write some notes and review them. And then I realized, wow, it's such an intense smell, kind of like, yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like this kind of like, maybe it's polyphenols or something, like which are really like
mm.
in the leaf when it's freshly ground, and it has this like olive oil flavor or
Yeah.
smell.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Pre-degraded state, because I think it just vanishes. It was pretty like weird how, and we kept it in the fridge, like literally 24 hours later, gone. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
It's a different tea.
Yeah, it was a different tea. It's a bit of a shame because it was like, what was it?
Like
It was
68
70
bucks.
bucks.
Yeah,
60
70
bucks. Yeah.
bucks.
Yeah,
Whatever.
it's probably something like 8,000 yen or 9,000 yen, something like that.
Yeah. Crazy. Sad.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, I have my fridge still have some stock from Maruka Koyama, and it's probably easier to buy matcha here than in Uji or something, because in Uji there's this limit now, one can per person. But I mean, once I'm done, I don't know. Like, I will for sure try to visit them when I'm in Uji, but like, I don't know my next batch when I can get it. Yeah.
About the tea from Nishio in Aichi
Hmm.
Prefecture. People talk a lot about like generalizing like the taste of Uji matcha or Yame matcha. Like Uji is famous for umami and green and verdant. Yame more nutty, creamy,
Roasty, toasty.
aromatically expressive, roasty, toasty. What is it like? How would you generalize the tea you've had from Aichi?
I think in general, because what's interesting is they do really long shading. So besides those hand-picked qualities, I also have now one quality of a Okumidori matcha, which is machine harvested, but it's still 40 days shaded. And
Wow, it's very long.
yeah, and it comes at and it's harvested really, really late because Okumidori is a very late cultivar. You imagine 40 days of shading. In order to achieve those 40 days, you have to start shading very early, I think. And then you like prolong the entire process. So I think it's harvested only by end of May, but it's still the first harvest. So it's interesting, in some sense, like it sure has an impact then on the flavor and everything if you shade for a very, very long time. And they also do, I think, mostly Tana shading in Nishio, which is also interesting.
Okay.
They don't use Honzu, but they use Tana shading. And Tana shading has the
So it
advantage
can
of like,
breathe.
exactly. I think especially if you shade so long, you cannot even do it with like directly on the bush because the bush would overheat. And then
Uh-huh.
I think it doesn't, maybe it only works for 20 days or something, but not for 40. And this Okumidori matcha, it's like the strongest. And it's also quality, which I say is like for daily use and for lattes even. And we also starting to collaborate with a few coffee shops here in Munich with this matcha because like I can offer it at a reasonable price also for them if they want to offer something a bit more special. And it also has the option then to be served as a usucha or maybe as a americano, matcha americano, because most of the
That's cool.
qualities currently in the specialty coffee scene, kind of like the matchas they serve, they're not really suitable for anything like that, in my opinion, unfortunately. But this is kind of my bottom approach, like kind of like the workshop is more kind of like educating and trying to show people who are interested what like matcha can be and how unique matchas, high-end matcha can be, but also on the other level to offer this other matcha. And I think that this matcha, because Okumidori is very strong, it's pretty harvested very late. It is bold and has like this umami and also like astringency and so on, but it's not super unique. I would say it's a very balanced, strong matcha, but it doesn't have any extreme floral notes or something. And I think in general, maybe niche teas have less umami for sure, I feel. And I think it's hard to compare. I would have to like drink them side by side. But maybe from some perspective, they're a bit more boring. But I think sometimes that's exactly what
Hmm.
you want, in the sense of that high-end matcha maybe is boring.
You wouldn't expect that, with 40 days of shading, you still would not achieve very high umaminess. Like, is it because of the fertilizer? Like, how do they fertilize?
So this is special about this format. It's completely pesticide-free and organic fertilizers. It's not organic as it is, but it's a very kind of low impact farming. And that's why I think it is that the umami, I think my assumption is always a lot of the umami comes from a certain type of fertilizer, if it's like fish bone, ground up fish bones or some other like fertilizers. If you use organic fertilizer, which you make yourself, I think it's very hard to achieve this really, really strong umami.
It's funny you say that because Sam and I were walking around Uji just randomly, and we smelled what we were pretty sure was fertilizer, and it just smelled like
Yeah,
fish.
smells like a fish
And it
market.
was so uncanny. It smelled like a wet market.
Mm,
that taste, the umaminess in the tea, just for the moment was very unappetizing. 'Cause you can feel like, "Oh, whoa, this like literally pulling this up from all this fish goop, and this flavor is getting transmitted into the tea." It's a weird moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also because if sometimes there are these different kinds of umami, like there's more the fishy umami, and then there's more the mushroomy umami, and then maybe more the vegetal umami. And I feel like it has a lot to do with the fertilizer at the end. Like it's really dependent on that. And obviously the cultivar has a bit of a change, but I think for these real umami bombs, it might not even be only the shading. I mean, this is interesting questions because you would think, okay, the amino acids, they're much more amino acids in the shaded tea because they're not getting converted in catechins and so on. And then, but what type of amino acids? You know, like is it really only umami or is it something different?
That's interesting. I think there's like 2 dozen or so common ones that, show up. Someone was telling us it was around 20, but about 50%, I think, of most matcha is L-theanine of the amino acid content, and then the rest is scattered. But it'd be really interesting to see I wonder if any farmers are doing that, where you have the same tea, same process, same everything, just different fertilizer. I wonder, it's really unclear what's actually driving a lot of this flavor profile. Is it just like tons of synthetic nitrogen? Is it like obviously it's some combination, but like what is driving it more? Like the shading, the cultivar, or the fertilizer? It's like very unclear, at least to me.
I mean, I'm also not sure because the yield, I mean, it's also a yield question. If you want to have the same yield with the shading and you don't want to, like, you need that output, then I guess you need some kind of synthetic fertilizer because the, the lack of sun is just creating some stress on the plants and so on. So the question is like almost like, how can you actually shade so long and so on? I mean, I don't know. There's so many factors involved with this whole matcha process. It's kind of interesting, yeah. That it's not that one dimensional.
There might be some research in Japanese just deep buried in some database or libraries
Probably.
about that.
Yeah,
It
but
is interesting.
yeah, I think that those teas, I think they're really good for like also when you say you want a very like a good matcha, but something affordable you want to drink every day, and you also trust the process and say, okay, you know, I'm not drinking something which has a lot of pesticides, a lot of like chemical fertilizer in it, and obviously I also need to meet the EU standards. So with this matcha, I can like rest assured. But
Nice.
then there are many matchas which I would like to offer, but I don't know if I could offer them. You know, so
Mm.
let's see. I mean, this trip, the upcoming trip to Japan now, I hope that I'll have a few interesting candidates come out of it.
Do you know the compliance burden for the EU certification? Because like I imagine because I know in coffee, just like some small coffee producers just cannot afford the complexities and the financial cost of the compliance proof of compliance.
For the organic or
I think for
for,
organic is what I mostly heard, but I don't EU compliance seem to be like JAS is not does not mean it's EU compliant, right?
but I think it would probably be taken as kind of a sure like a sure thing that everything with JAS should somehow be EU compliant. And I think probably, so I think as an importer, you're forced to do like checks, also regularly do some random checks with your imports. And I think that's also what I'm going to do now. I think, for example, like a company like Koyamaen is so big, they know what they're doing. If they make a specific plan for the European Union, they have the capability to do this. But like smaller farmers, they will not do their own testing if they don't have many customers in the European Union. So for that, I have to then test at least every 2 years some of the batches and then
Oh, the
make sure that
burden moves to the importer.
exactly because this is also what I have to do now when I import a product. Doesn't matter which tea where it comes from. If I import it into the European Union, I have to put my labels on it. So
Oh.
I put additionally a label on it, which obviously says, yeah, I'm the importer and so on, because basically I'm the person who introduced it into the European Union. Yeah, that's it's kind of my responsibility. But I think it's fine, you know, especially if you do B2B and sell to other say coffee shops and so on, and this is like kind of produced a lot or consumed a lot, then I think it makes sense to for sure make sure that it's meeting all those requirements. So that's yeah. And then in the workshop we're gonna try also we have one final matcha which this time was you probably also tried something like that before, like Asahi cultivar from Tsuji from Shirakawa. This
Nice.
yeah, so this I got that luckily not on his own website because it's always sold out so quickly. It's almost impossible to get anything on his website. And I got recommended his matcha like a year ago from a contact of mine in Nagoya. A friend of mine, she runs a gallery there, but I never was able to contact him directly. So I just had to find some other online shops which have some of his stuff. So I was lucky to get this for the workshop. And it's really interesting because this tea is almost like kind of like has some kind of egginess to it, like some kind of egg yolk, custardy flavor, which is really crazy. And also I prepare it obviously kind of as in between usucha and koicha, so to get a lot of foam and like the intensity. Koicha wouldn't make sense in this setting because you cannot really serve it well unless you don't care about hygiene and stuff. But I guess in order to serve it into different cups, you need to like use a bit more water. But I like to use in a 1 to 15 or something, 1 gram to 15 mil. And it's really interesting matcha.
What did everyone think? How was it received?
I think they really liked it, but if they compared it at the end in this questionnaire, I think it's not really standing out much.
Yeah.
I think it's like it has maybe like 1 or 2 people rated it like an a 9 instead of an 8, and the other like like it's like really minusculous, like small. They like basically all the teas a lot. Maybe I should ask for more like hard feedback, but I think most of the people really liked most of the matchas, and I think that even the Maruku Kuramayan blend was similarly rated to the
Interesting.
So the preferences didn't align with price and what the Japanese would consider quality for these German consumers.
Yeah, I mean, I think they really liked it, but I think that the question is always, would they integrate this into their own matcha drinking at home? I'm not sure. I think, and basically we end the workshop. Then we have a small part where we talk a bit about brewing matcha, also a bit about before we drink the Asahi matcha, we talk a bit about like how the matcha scene is evolving currently. And this is a part which I still want to develop a bit further, but it just gives a bit of like current status of the matcha scene and how matcha becomes this kind of like international beverage, and how more and more like smaller farmers are also getting acknowledgement. And that's why we also try this tea, because he's like an example for that. And it's also kind of part of my mission to rather work with the farmers together directly, and then disclose as much as possible about them, like or directly disclose who the farmer is ideally. And that's like the approach I want to drive also for other businesses potentially. Like if you put a bit of a pressure on the market, potentially other people will also feel pressure to raise their quality or be more transparent. But I'm not sure. I'm a small player.
Well, it's got to start somewhere. Like you have enough people showing up asking what the cultivar was or where it was grown. I think it does put pressure. Like I don't know how else this will ever work if it's not bottom up, because no one at the business level or the higher levels of this industry have any incentive to do anything but keep it mysterious, protecting their suppliers. It's kind of convenient that people don't ask a lot of these questions, and I think it all starts at the grassroots level, I think, for this type of specialty industry to develop.
Yeah, I mean, in the current, like, I compare it a bit to, we're currently in the Dubai chocolate phase of matcha. I don't know, if you heard about Dubai chocolate, but it's just like chocolate filled with pistachios, and the prices suddenly, like from a normal chocolate bar for 2-3 euros or dollars, went up to like 15 to 20. And then you read, then there's like 5% pistachio inside, or maybe 8. And pistachio is an expensive ingredient, but like, I mean, basic math shows you that the markups must be crazy in this industry. And I think the same is applies to matcha. Right now, I think there are just, I mean, some qualities for sure which have someone, I don't know who, like either a wholesaler in Japan or like mostly retailers in the West, they're marking up like beyond a normal margin, and that's like you can taste it. I mean, yeah, you can see it.
Yeah.
everywhere, and some places have better things, and other places have not so good things. I mean, it's a mixed bag at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about experience and the correct reference for consumer
Hmm.
to validate. So it's nice that you are offering this opportunity for people in Munich to really try and learn.
Yeah, and I mean, every week there's a new matcha spot opening here in town.
Oh, wow, it's
Wow.
I think
exploding.
Okay.
like that's
Nice.
yeah, it's summer is coming, so I think it's really yeah. I would like to make some research and go in there and ask the baristas like, oh, what kind of matcha is it? Like, ask them some basic questions and see how far I get. And just like, I'm not very good at like mystery shopping, but like could be a cool
Yeah, you're like a secret customer.
exactly. Just
I
ask
do
them a
that
bit.
too sometimes.
Or maybe you can offer some sort of a consulting service to these cafe shops to.
Exactly, that's my idea also, because doing a bit of B2B, I want to offer those coffee shops which work with me also kind of like a workshop format, which is more specialized on the whole like
Yeah, training the barista.
barista side, and but still give them the basics, like if they know there are these growing regions and we have this and not that because of XYZ, or because we can, yeah, like, I mean, there's different reasons you would need this kind of like this background knowledge. And I think it's not easily accessible anywhere, especially not for people who just started in a coffee shop who just started matcha 2-3 weeks ago,
Yeah.
It seems like in Germany, Aya is kind of at the top of the funnel, like really dominates the game in Austria and Germany, I've heard.
I think
Is
that
that what you see in Munich too?
I see some Aya, but like I think that most of the places have some kind of Kagoshima matcha, I think. So many of them, I guess those ones who don't really disclose where the matcha comes from, probably like some white labeled Aya matcha, because I think Aya also offers the like white labeling, custom brand things. But I think other ones probably have a more direct approach and try to find a supplier.
Oh,
There's a few brands coming up which also run their own coffee shops. But at the end, you have to see that this is something which is separate to the specialty coffee scene, kind of, because it's much more kind of like punch drinks with a lot of fruit toppings and so on. And I think that the other side of it is more the specialty coffee shops which offer a pure matcha latte.
hmm.
So these are kind of like separate entities. Either you're specialized on matcha and then you do all kinds of interesting things, but maybe because there's more sugar involved, the quality of the matcha is not always so important. And then you have the other spots which are more specialty coffee shops, and they have a more solid quality in average, I would say, and they also not offering all the toppings because it doesn't match their workflow. Like
Yeah.
it's even hard for them to offer matcha at all. So they use a squeeze bottle style often.
Well, the pre-prepared syrup things.
I mean, it's not. It's they pre-prep it just, I think, the same day, and then they cool it. And um, something I want to do as a research to see, like, do this, make some kind of like 1 to 10 like liquid and put it really at 4 degrees in the fridge for like 4 hours, and then test it versus a freshly made one and see what's the difference, because I didn't made up my mind about it yet.
I've
I don't know.
had some decent ones. I've never had anything profound that was like that, but I've had some stuff where I was actually kind of shocked. I hate it. I didn't want to like it. I was like,
It's not bad.
It's unbad.
I'm bad.
I think you prevent a lot of mistakes, like, you know,
Yes.
you don't have clumps because you mix it once properly. You don't oversteep because you never heat it up. But it also lacks some of the body and the power, I feel, because how they do it is they add it into a cup, a preheated cup, and they just add 20 mils of this liquid and then never whisk it or anything. And then they just pour a bit of hot milk in it and try to mix it all, and then they make their latte. That's my assumption. And it's kind of a cold brew matcha topped up with hot milk. And then you never properly extracted the matcha in a sense of that you got all the, like this 1 or 2 minutes whisking it, exposing it to like 70, 80 degrees really extracts some other flavors, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
For that kind of usage, you probably want something that's like really bitter and astringent to begin with for it to stand out in this preparation method instead of using some like less astringent, more sweet matcha.
Yeah, and it's also a lot about ratios. I mean, I think that if I test random matchas, like there's many things you could say can go wrong, like too much milk is one of the problems. It tastes milky and faintly like matcha. It's a very common problem.
I've been developing this thought recently. I haven't really expressed it to anyone yet, but curious to hear what you guys is that everyone keeps talking about this bitterness and astringency needing to stand up to milk. But I actually think that that might be the wrong framework. I was reading some online discourse and everyone's saying that culinary grade really should be what's used in these lattes. And I bought a bunch of culinary grade matcha recently, and some from a premium culinary grade from a very well known vendor that we all heard of. And it was decently expensive. And I tasted it. I tried it in a latte. There was nothing. There was no taste. It was supposedly from Spring Harvest. I think it was from some Uji producer, but it like objectively tasted disgusting. And like I've even experimented, and I hesitate to say this here, but like using Norino cultivar and seeing what that tastes like. I'm sorry, it tastes good. There's no bitterness, and it tastes good. There's like a lot of intensity, and it just expresses different flavors. And I find a lot of this very bitter and astringent stuff very empty. And that really, I think we need to shift the discussion about intensity,
I
because you
think
don't
so.
just want this like bitter, astringent nothing, pale green, boring matcha stuff.
Exactly. I think that like you can see it also now a lot. Like if you look at the successful matcha places in the US, like recently, because I do some research about it, because I also want to open like maybe a slow bar here at some point. And the whole topic of like ratios and like what type of drinks you offer and how much gram of matcha you put in. And if you look at something like Kettle or now 12 Matcha in New York, which just opened, and I think it's just much nicer if you use a decent quality matcha. Obviously, you have to have a sweet spot quality to offer it for a reasonable price. Otherwise, your costs will explode as a matcha bar. But either making a 2-gram cortado, that's now my recipe, I would say, which I like to do when I'm also testing matchas. It's like 2 grams, and then either it's whisked or it's like just you make a paste out of it, and then you add 80 to 90 mil of milk foam, which is probably less than 70 grams of milk to it. And that's really just a small matcha latte. Or you go and make a iced matcha latte with 4 grams of matcha, or like even more. But I think 4 grams of matcha, and then with all the water and milk diluting the flavor, I think you need really 3 to 4 grams for like this latte. Like a latte is not a cappuccino. A latte is a big mug of milk with something inside.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's also a big ratio problem.
And I think it's a cost thing. Like when you say you use 1 gram more for the drink, and you use a better matcha, it means that the price will double or triple very quickly because you use a better matcha. And I think that's what's the only problem, I would say.
Definitely will come down to price too. Although the people screaming at each other online, telling all the matcha latte people to drink this culinary grade stuff, like they should like take a sip of some of their own medicine. It doesn't taste good, like even in a latte format.
I also feel like, especially this, because everybody says, oh, yeah, you don't need a stone ground matcha for a matcha latte, but you can just taste it, like this like powderiness of the ball milled matcha. Not every ball milled matcha is the same powderiness, but I feel like now I tested a few samples, and I was drinking the pure matcha, and afterwards, just like that's literally 2 minutes later, I was drinking a latte with it, because I just tested and make a bigger batch and drink it pure as well as a latte. And I think I can taste the graininess as like exactly the same way through the milk. And it's really weird. Like, once it's grainy in milk. It doesn't really work so well.
No, I've noticed that too. And doing especially back-to-back Ishiyusu and ball mill comparison, that contrast is way more apparent when you have them side by side.
Yeah, but that's what I'm also introducing in this workshop. At the end, we do this practice session, and everybody gets to try this like I call it like sweet spot quality, which is our Okumidori matcha, which is like, I want to find more of those for also offering it to coffee shops, in a sense that it is affordable for daily drinking, and you can drink it pure, but you can make a latte with it, and you can make a, like, maybe you don't make a koicha obviously with it, but you make like a kind of a normal usucha and it tastes good, and you make a matcha americano with it and dilute it with a bit more water and it also tastes good. So these are the kind of qualities which are still stone milled and so on, that kind of like not as much on the market, I think.
Absolutely. I think that sweet spot is exactly what everyone's looking for. Harder and harder to find. But that's awesome, though. I need to try this. Do you ship to France?
Yeah, I ship worldwide basically. I mean,
Cool.
my new web shop, I still have to put all the shipping rates on, but like the US and Canada and the European Union are on it now. Even though the US, I don't know these days, it's a bit difficult.
Cool. So, Marcel, moving forward, what's your future plan for your work and for Matcha too?
I mean, I just started with Matcha, and we'll see what the next months bring, because you never know with the current situation, it's not so easy. But I'm still focusing on my core business, which is my kind of arts and crafts gallery and selling teaware and ceramics. But I want to integrate it much more with the application of tea in general, and also with matcha, and build this space as a space where you can experience high-end craft and arts, but also crafted teas and crafted matcha, and yeah, try to make a coherent experience out of it, and potentially open up a small slow bar here, which like integrates the interesting, like, let's say, glassware from Japan, or also Chinese porcelain or Chinese teaware into a concept of a bar where you bring tea closer to people. Not only matcha, but matcha obviously is like an entry point now for many people.
Sounds almost like a Kisaten style, with like a collection of all these things, and it's slow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the idea. It should be very individual, like unique pieces. We'll see what we can use on the bar. Obviously, like there's a limit to kind of like risk involved, but it is nice to experience something from the product you drink to the product you hold, and then be able to after it also say, oh, I want to take that home because it's such a nice experience and I got so close to it. And it has a lot to do with the Japanese tea ceremony as well, I think, because in a Japanese tea ceremony, it's all about, like, for me, it's like creating, also in Chinese tea ceremony, creating like this space for people to be very receptive about the things they hold in their hand, and kind of like get intimate with those small things in the tea room. And the theanine obviously helps with it. But yeah, I think it's interesting what kind of mood you can create when you host a tea gathering or something
That's
similar.
cool. Maybe you can even incorporate some musics in the future.
Yeah, that's also on my list.
Nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. Super cool. And then it's more participatory. It's not something that's behind glass or this ambiguous thing. It's a much more one-on-one human connection kind of way to approach it.
Yeah, it shouldn't be too formal. It should be still having kind of a bit of this casual vibe, like in a high-end bar where you drink alcoholic drinks, but kind of like you can talk to the barkeeper, you can ask about the products, you can ask about their opinion. And yeah, this is definitely my vision. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm only one person here running this business, so I have to see how far I can get.
Cool, though. It
Uh,
has to start somewhere.
yeah, best of luck. Good luck.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming on. I think that's all we have time for. But if you enjoyed this podcast, please consider sharing it with a friend, and we'll see you on the next one.
See you in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.